Hello, I'm Esther Gitu-Ewart. It's Thursday, September 15th. This is Africa 54.
Ten killed in new airstrikes on Ethiopia's Tigray capital as local forces accuse troops from neighboring Eritrea of joining the war against them. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II lies in state for 4 days ahead of her funeral. It's Africa Fashion Week in New York City, and the Big Apple's prestigious Berkeley Colleges pays tribute to the influence of African culture in America. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
Residents of a residential neighborhood in the capital of Ethiopia's Tigray region are reeling on Thursday after 2 airstrikes hit Mekelle, killing at least 10 people. The director of a local hospital says the fatalities occurred in the second strike and included first responders. And now there are claims that soldiers from neighboring Eritrea have again entered the conflict. Christy Kilburn reports.
At least 10 people have died in a second day of airstrikes against the capital of Ethiopia's northern Tigray region, hospital officials have said. Wednesday's reported drone strikes in Mekelle followed an offer of a ceasefire by the Tigray People's Liberation Front at the weekend. It's been fighting federal forces since late 2020. Ethiopia's government did not immediately respond to requests for comment. A hospital official said 2 people were also wounded on Tuesday in strikes on Mekelle University and a local TV station. Another reported airstrike also hit at the end of August. The conflict has killed thousands of civilians, uprooted millions, and caused starvation in the already impoverished Tigray region. On Tuesday, TPLF Commander-in-Chief Tadesse Werde said in an interview on Tigrayan television that Eritrea's military had again joined the conflict, taking the town of Shirero near the border. Eritrea's Minister of Information did not respond to requests for comment. Spokesmen for Ethiopia's military and government also did not respond to requests for comment. Eritrean troops previously entered the war days after it erupted. Both governments denied their presence for around 5 months. Residents and rights groups have accused Eritrean troops of abuses, including gang rape and sexual enslavement of civilians, mass civilian killings, and torture. Eritrea denied those accusations. Verifying claims is difficult as reporters are not allowed into the region, and it has had no phone connection since federal troops pulled out more than a year ago.
Christy Kilburn of Reuters filed that report. Joao Lourenço was sworn in as Angolan president on Thursday in Luanda for a second 5-year term. Lourenço took the oath of office after the country's constitutional court dismissed a petition from opposition leader Adalberto Costa Jr. challenging the outcome of the August 24th elections. President Lourenço is promising to create jobs for the unemployed youth. There are concerns about a possible flare-up of violence as the opposition calls for their supporters to protest beginning September 24th. UNITA opposition leaders boycotted the inauguration and decried the heavy police presence, saying it was meant to stifle protests. For more on Angola, I'm joined live via Skype from Washington by VOA Portuguese reporter Joao Santa Rita. Joao, Thursday was such a big day in Angola. Tell us what President Lourenço is going to do differently in his second term.
Well, thank you for having me. That's the big question. His speech basically was a speech in which he made a lot of promises regarding economic development. He pointed to a lot of infrastructure projects, which, by the way, had already been announced before or already underway. Refineries in different parts of the country, construction of a port in Cabinda. He promised also to gear the economic policy towards the youth. The unemployment amongst the youth is huge, and the MPLA has been losing support amongst the youth, mainly in the urban areas. But I can't say there is anything particularly striking in this speech that was different from promises made before. We've already had some reactions, and this was exactly what it was pointed out by political parties in the opposition and leaders of civil society organizations. Mm-hmm. They hope that the president will concentrate a lot on social aspects because the situation is dire in certain parts of the country.
Now, Joao, there's news about women being in power in Angola. You now have the first female vice president, Esperança da Costa. What can you tell us about her?
Well, the new vice president is a biologist, so it's not very often that we have a biologist as on the top echelons of power, and indeed it's like you say, that's really a change, because what you have now after the president, you have her as vice president, so she's in line of succession. And then after her, you have the president of the National Assembly, which is third in line for succession, and that's a former journalist. Her name is Carolina Cerqueira. And then we have also the third in line for succession, which is the president of the Constitutional Court. So the president of the Constitutional Court, Laurinda Cardoso, she was appointed. She has already been, in charge for a few months. So that's really a change. But and that was welcomed by a well-known activist for women's rights, Luisa Rogério, who said that this could be a turning point in the balance, let's say, in the equity between males and females in power in Angola.
And from however, what you know, Joao, does this signify a change in terms of how the government of Angola includes women in positions of power, and what should the younger women expect in the coming years?
Well, I think this is let's say a practical conclusion of promises that the president has made in the past to include more women in the structures of power. So I think this is a window of opportunity for young women. But, we contacted the opposition. They were happy about this, that João Lourenço is appointing women. But they pointed out, perhaps rightly, that the problem in Angola is not just of having more women, is what these women are going to do. And so that's the question. These are obviously women who are aligned with the MPLA party. So for the opposition, this is not a big development, although it's a development.
All right, Joao, we'll follow up and see what the opposition calling for protests from the September 24th means for the country and what they expect to achieve. Joao Santa Rita is a VOA Portuguese reporter reporting live for us here in Washington via Skype. New Kenyan President William Ruto is promising to unify the country following a tight presidential race between him and opposition leader Raila Odinga. A day before handing over the presidency to Ruto, former President Uhuru Kenyatta said opposition leader Odinga will be his leader. In his second term as president, Kenyatta publicly fell out with Ruto and threw his support behind Odinga. Joem Divo, the executive director for the East Africa Center for Law and Justice, says President Ruto is bound by law to unite the country, including those opposed to his presidency.
The presidency is a symbol of national unity. And by law, the president does not govern Kenyans based on how they voted for him. He governs Kenyans according to his oath of office, without fear, favor, or ill will. And so even with the disgruntlement by the parties that did not vote for him, President Ruto actually has no choice. He has to be everybody's president. Now, his predecessor did not do a very good job of masking personal preferences and public office. And we were treated to a spectacle where the deputy president and the president fell out quite publicly and quite acrimoniously, to a level that it became functionally impossible for them to work together. Now, because by law they're bound, they're joined at the hip, It was a very difficult tenure for both of them. But now President Ruto has got a chance to start over. President Kenyatta is on record as saying that he only recognizes Raila Amolo Odinga as his leader. Well, good thing is it's not really up to him to recognize who the leader is. We know who our leader is. We are now under President William Samoei Ruto. And whether he likes it or not, President Uhuru Kenyatta now has a new president. And with that in mind, we expect now President Ruto to rise above the previous fray, because he has said, I have no grudge with anybody. I'm going to work for all the Kenyans. And so we expect him to walk the talk. And because of that, William Ruto has also said he does not intend to be vengeful with anybody. That said, I do expect that we will see him undoing some of the things that his predecessor had done that he felt were harmful. And emancipation of some of the institutions, that again is a clear departure from what his predecessor had done. So I expect we will see him do some things diametrically opposed to how Uhuru Kenyatta did them. But I hope that there will be no bad blood between them. And now, because they're not in office together, even if there is, it is a private matter. It's no longer played out in the public as it was before.
Jerome Devo is the Executive Director for the East Africa Center for Law and Justice. The acting director of the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention says the COVID-19 pandemic is still a threat in Africa. Ahmed Ogwell Omar says just over 22% of Africa's population is fully vaccinated against COVID, and that his agency will continue to push to raise that number. African countries struggled to secure early supplies of COVID vaccines. More recently, hesitancy and logistic problems have made it difficult to get shots into arms. A new report by the United Nations Refugee Agency reveals that 42% of refugee children worldwide are enrolled in pre-primary education. Paul Ndiho has more.
More than half of the world's 27 million refugees are children, but only 68% of school-age children are enrolled in primary schools. Refugees are in need to access a high-quality education from early childhood to higher learning.
Education is very important. Some of these children are refugee children born in difficult circumstances, often very small when they have to flee their country. Education gives them hope, gives them a sense that there is a future. This is why it's so important to support refugee education, in particular when it is done together with the host community.
The campaign for refugee education calls for including refugees in national education systems from the start of humanitarian emergencies through protracted displacement situations and in long-term development planning.
Just 42% of refugee children are enrolled globally in pre-primary, 68% in primary, which then goes down significantly to 37% in secondary. There has been an increase to 6% in tertiary, but the numbers are and remain relatively low.
At the start of the new school year, education experts say there is a movement regarding the number of children allocated places and funding around teacher support. Investing in good schools with quality teachers, better learning resources, and the proper certification helps to equip children with the needed skills for life and work, including a chance to turn dreams and ambitions into reality.
Inclusive school helped me a lot because I compete with the other learners. It made me to have that courage of saying that who I am, not to be number one. I want to be a lawyer because I want to defend people who have been denied their rights, like people with disability, orphans, and widows.
The data compiled from more than 40 countries highlights a disturbing disparity in the quality of education provided to refugees compared to non-refugees. The report urges the international community to back up inclusion efforts with funding, infrastructure, technology, and training. UNHCR's annual education report is being published just as world leaders prepare to debate the future of learning at the Transforming Education Summit, September 16th through the 19th at the UN General Assembly. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
The world's poorest countries say they will insist that the UN's upcoming climate talks push ahead with proposals for a fund to compensate vulnerable nations for climate-inflicted damage. Ministers and experts from the 46-nation least developed countries LCD bloc meeting in Dakar said their countries were most exposed to climate impact, but least to blame for the carbon emissions that cause it. In a statement issued late Wednesday ahead of the November climate talks, they said that setting up a funding mechanism for loss and damage was of crucial importance. They also reiterated a call for all parties, particularly major emitters, to make swift and deep cuts in carbon emissions and for rich economies to honor past pledges on climate aid. COP27, the 27th Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, runs in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh from November 6th to 18th. 2 minutes of silence is to be observed Monday across Britain at the end of Queen Elizabeth's state funeral at Westminster Abbey. That's to give the British public a final chance to pay their respects to the late monarch. A funeral by 2,000 guests, including US President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, the body of the Queen is lying in state inside Westminster Hall. Henry Ridgewell has more from London.
Leaving home for the last time, Queen Elizabeth II's coffin, adorned with the imperial state crown, was carried by horse-drawn gun carriage, the same that had borne the bodies of her mother and father. Tens of thousands of people watched from the roadside to catch a final glimpse, offer a last goodbye, and witness firsthand an extraordinary piece of history unfolding. King Charles III led the royal family behind the coffin, flanked by his siblings. Behind them, reunited in grief for their grandmother, Prince William and Prince Harry. The crowd watched in silence. Some threw flowers, some quietly wept. All were moved in the moment of shared mourning.
There's such a respect for, I don't know, a better way to put it, but pomp and circumstance in this country that really pulls people together, and it's really an honor to be a part of it.
So proud, I feel elated. That's all I can say. Filled with emotion, it was well worth the wait.
Gun salutes echoed across the capital. In London's Hyde Park, thousands more people watched on big screens. Under late summer sunshine, the procession arrived in Westminster, a journey the Queen had made so many times before, across 7 decades on the British throne, stretching back to the government of Winston Churchill. Her coffin was carried into Westminster Hall by guardsmen from the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, who had flown back from Iraq for the occasion. At the end of a brief service, the Queen's body officially lay in state. The doors of the Great Hall opened for the public to mourn their monarch. Outside, lines of people several kilometres long had already formed. They could face a wait of up to 27 hours. Most seem unperturbed.
I haven't had any sleep whatsoever. I'm just going with the energy that's within. I feel very uplifted, very calm and happy to be able to show my last respects to the Queen.
She's been there my entire life. She's like a grandmother.
Bryony Stevenson waited in line with her 3-month-old baby.
It's one of those once-in-a-lifetime occasion. My little one was born a Jubilee baby, and I think it's important for us to make this occasion because it's a huge part of history.
Westminster Hall was built in 1097. It hosted King Henry VIII's coronation banquet in 1509, the trial of King Charles I in 1649. For the next 4 days, the hall is playing no less a historic role in this ancient kingdom. Hundreds of thousands of people are expected to view the coffin. Elizabeth's funeral will take place on Monday in Westminster Abbey, before her body is taken to Windsor, where she will be laid to rest next to her late husband, Prince Philip. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
From Kenya and Nigeria to South Africa and Uganda, Queen Elizabeth's death was met with an outpouring of official condolences, mourning and memories of her frequent visits to Africa during her 7 decades on the throne. But the British monarch's passing also revived a sensitive debate over Africa's colonial past. Her death came at a time when European countries are under pressure to reckon with their colonial histories, atoning for past crimes and returning stolen African artifacts held for years in museums from London and Paris. But many Africans reflected more on the tragedies from colonial times, including events that occurred in the first decade of her rule.
I want to condemn those kinds of comments. You know, when you say that you wish that somebody, you know, would die excruciating death or something like that, I think that's un-African. But well, like I said earlier also, that is normal. Particularly the person who said that, the professor who said that, actually explained that she personally, her family, suffered a lot of indignities, degradation, deaths, and all sorts of things as a result of the colonialism and the intervention of Britain, of the colonialists in African affairs, particularly in Nigeria.
We offer our condolences to the Windsor family, but we do not feel compelled to mourn Queen Elizabeth II, considering that she presided over a lot of atrocities in Africa. We still have the heads of our ancestors in the British museums, which we have asked time and again to be repatriated back to Zimbabwe, and that has not been done. And lastly, we have been asking for reparations for everything that was looted from our country, and we have never gotten a response from the late Queen.
We would like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, the latest on Africa Fashion Week in New York. We'll have a report. Stay with us.
Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth, passed away on Thursday, September 8th. Her death has brought to surface many ugly aspects of British colonialism and ignited contentious feelings about her life and legacy. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we hear diverse voices on Queen Elizabeth's long-lasting and controversial relationship with Africa. But what about African queens, women presidents, and icons? We will also consider some of them who have changed the course of the continent's history. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
Every year, world leaders gather in New York for the annual United Nations General Assembly. Count on VOA to be there, delivering news you can trust on radio, TV, and the web.
Des discours présidentiels aux entretiens en tête-à-tête avec des responsables gouvernementaux de haut niveau, nous vous tiendrons informés des développements importants touchant le continent.
Líderes africanos vão abordar tópicos como alterações climáticas, o estado da economia, saúde, iniciativas juvenis e muito mais.
Usikose kufuatilia habari na vipindi maalum katika lugha 16 tofauti kuhusu kongamano la viongozi moja kwa moja kutoka makao makuu ya Umoja wa Mataifa mjini New York na Washington DC. Tutakuarifu kila tukio.
A free press is essential. VOA Africa.
In other African news, the world is observing International Democracy Day on Thursday. The day is being commemorated by focusing on the importance of media freedom to democracy, peace, and delivering on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The world's poorest countries are insisting that the upcoming UN climate talks push ahead with proposals for a fund to compensate vulnerable nations for climate-inflicted damage. And fuel prices in Kenya surged to record highs Thursday after the new government slashed subsidies. Cameroonian fashion designer Kiboneni is excited about debuting her fashion label Kibonen at Berkeley College. The prestigious school selected the iconic fashion designer to be their designer in residence and install a pop-up shop during this week's New York Fashion Week as a tribute to the influence of African culture in America. Here again is Paul Ndiho, who spoke to Fee, the CEO of the Cameroon Clothing Company.
welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for having me.
How is New York, and how are you planning for the Fashion Week this week?
It's high energy. The adrenaline is pumping. I am excited. It's Fashion Week. And this is the time when the world shuts down to see what the leaders in fashion have to offer us.
You have been selected to showcase some of your stuff at one of the most prestigious schools in New York. Tell us what you're showcasing this week.
This is our time. This is the time for Africans to shine, and this is the time for us to break the rules. For the first time ever, Berkeley College, one of the most prestigious schools in New York, which runs an amazing fashion merchandising program, is hosting Kibonen as their designer in residence.
Congratulations.
This is a great thing for the brand, because we are exposed to using some of their facilities and to have a prestigious installation and pop-up shop.
African fashion is like taking over. You go to New York, you see a lot of people sporting African clothing. The two of us are sporting African clothing. Hey, stuff is happening.
There are wonderful designers from the continent of Africa. When it comes to creativity, we are at the top. The only problem which we have to solve now is the management, the merchandising, like the visuals, packaging our fashion and putting it out to the world. So this is the time when we've broken the stereotypes, we've taken away the cliches, and we are doing the business of fashion.
Why do you think that it's taken this long for Africans, the likes of your brand, other major brands from Africa, to get the kind of recognition that you're getting now?
As Africans, we've had a kind of complex, an inferiority complex about who we are and what we have. So this is the time, and I'm so grateful for things like social media that have helped break these barriers. But we have decided that we are taking our authentic selves to the world, and they just have to get ready for us. The creative industries have done so much to sell the positive side of Africa, and that's what's attracting everybody and giving us also the ability to get in and, you know, do what we have to do.
You've also had an opportunity to dress up some of Hollywood's elite, the likes of Lupita Nyong'o, Gayle King. What was it like to maybe to do something for those incredible, talented people?
To think Lupita wore 2 of my dresses within a week, I could throw the microphone and just go back home, like, you know what, Kibonen, you've done.
Mic drop.
Paul Ndiho speaking to Kibonen Ife of the Cameroon Clothing Company, and that's our show today.